All right. Let's pull up a seat, talk about where we are right now with this thing. In the last video on the Corvette, you saw me struggling with getting this thing to start, and I spent some time, a few hours actually, on the phone with Holly troubleshooting through this, and the result of that was they wanted me to send the ECU back. They felt that there was probably a problem there, and when they got it back, they confirmed pretty quickly that the ECU was in fact defective. You saw it on the last video, and if you haven't watched that, you can go back and watch that, but it wasn't running through the wizard properly, so I am waiting on a replacement ECU. I've been hearing from other forums and places that the ECUs are on back order right now. I'm probably another month out before I get mine. So that's put a pause on everything. I am waiting for the Bellhousing from Holly as well, but I believe that's going to show up tomorrow. So progress can be made. I was really hoping that the next video on the Corvette was going to be a first start, but without an ECU, that's not going to be possible. However, with the Bellhousing, I can pretty much finish everything up underneath the car. So that's where we're going to get to on this video. I'm going to start with going ahead and bolting in the clutch this evening, and then hopefully with the Bellhousing in hand tomorrow, this weekend, I can get to putting the transmission back in, the drive shaft, and all of the drivetrain components underneath, and we can work on fabricating an exhaust. And really everything should be done down there once we've completed that, and we're really just waiting on an ECU so we can get this thing fired up and get it on the road again. Getting excited. Clutch installed, ready for a Bellhousing to arrive tomorrow. Oh man, after 6 months of waiting, it's finally here. It took a lot longer than I wanted it to, but it is finally here, so we are gonna get to throwing this on. You just watched me put on the clutch, but this is a one-piece unit here. Which means that both the clutch and the flywheel are going to have to come off. On the old one, it was a two-piece, so this would be able to slide around. This, I think it's a corrosion plate, basically. Would have been able to slide around the flywheel and I wouldn't have to pull it all off. Didn't know that, so clutch and flywheel have to come back off. But before I get to that, I'm going to take a couple measurements and just make sure that the thickness, the stack height of this is the same. I'm pretty sure it is based on the measurements that I was able to find online, but we're gonna throw this up here and just make sure. Okay, I'm gonna try and do this with one hand. I've got these turned upside down. I do have the anti-corrosion plate down below. Let me just set this down here, because I'm going to have to put a little weight on this, but with this pressed down, let's see, just want to get a good measurement to the floor. I'm getting 152.5 millimeters. And honestly, this is not all the way down. This bottom plate's a little warped. And on this one, I've got that bottom plate as well, the dust shield, scatter shield, and then I'm going to take the same measurement here, and I'm getting 149.6, so about 2 millimeters difference. I do have some shims, so not sure if that 2 millimeters is made up on the kind of warpage here. It probably is. So they should be pretty much the same, but I can shim it if necessary. Key difference here, because I'm running essentially an LS7 8-bolt flywheel and clutch plate, it will use a hydraulic throwout bearing, so that'll have to be shimmed anyway from the front of the transmission and rest in here, whereas this was hydraulic slave cylinder with a fork. So we'll have to take the necessary measurements and make sure we shim everything. If anyone is doing this conversion and wanting to use the hydraulic slave cylinder and a traditional pull style clutch fork system, this does have the provision for everything here, I believe. Actually, maybe not. It does not have the provision for a slave cylinder. There is a ball on it here for a fork, but we won't be using that because of the hydraulic throwout bearing. The hydraulic lines will just come through the hole there. So let's get to pulling the clutch and the flywheel off, and then we'll throw this plate on, put it all back together, throw this on, and start checking measurements. Actually, before I even get to that, I think the next step is I'm going to go ahead and bolt this bell housing onto the ZF6 transmission and just make sure everything lines up. I don't really believe that it will have a problem, but might as well just throw it on there before we go to the next step. I'm glad I test fit this. It is really tight. I mean, I can't get these bolts cinched down into the bell housing tight. It's really close, but the idea of this is just a tad too tight on this diameter here, so I'm gonna have to shave this down just a little bit to get it to fit. So I'm glad I test fitted this before I put it in the car, because that would have been the wrong time to figure out that these don't fit together very tightly. All right, and like that, these two are mated up together. They were about 0.3 of a millimeter off in terms of ID to OD, so I just took my Dremel real quick and ran it around there a few times. Mostly it was probably just removing the paint or powder coating, whatever's on this bell housing, and maybe just a little hair of material, but it didn't take too long to clean that up. So that's all on there flush. You can pull this back off and work on getting the clutch and flywheel out, and then getting this all mounted in. One other thing I should note that I should have noted earlier is that I received tracking information for the Holley ECU today, so looks like it's probably about 5 days away, which means if everything goes smoothly, we might get it started in this video. You'll have to stay tuned to the end to see if we actually get it started or skip forward. But if I get everything done underneath and I get that ECU in, we can plug it in and hopefully get this thing started. Not sure if I'll do it in this video, depends on the length, or we might do it in the next one. Okay, these bolts are 12 point, and I don't actually have the 12 point in the right size. So I'm gonna keep struggling with getting these at least started up here. Gonna have to make a run to the store tomorrow to get the right socket for this, but I can at least get them all started. So I'm gonna keep struggling off camera with getting these going, and then I can probably move to working on mounting that hydraulic throwout bearing on the transmission. Okay, I've been looking things over, and I'm gonna do my best to show this on camera, but I have a couple of clearance issues that I'll show you first, and then I'll talk about what I think I'm gonna do to address this. One, over on this side, this collector of the flange is really close to the fiberglass. Here, it's not touching, but it's pretty close. And that's right, my foot's gonna sit right here on the other side of this fiberglass while I'm driving. So I'd like this to have a little more clearance. And then the other, probably bigger issue, and I think I've said this in previous videos, it's gonna be hard to see, but the top of this passenger side head is really kind of resting up against this fiberglass. I have these motor mounts loose here, and I cannot get the back of this motor to, see if I can demonstrate. I can't get the back of this motor to drop so that I can get to the top bolts. So here's what I think I'm gonna do. On these adjustable motor mounts, let's see if I can get in there and show. Okay, there are two about 1/4 inch thick washers on either side of these motor mounts. There's also, this ITT billet has a plate that has an adjustment every, I'm gonna say, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inches here. You can see the kind of the different holes and different spacing. But I think moving back a hole is gonna be too much. There is another, I think Dirty Dingo makes a plate that they're just sliders that would give you infinite adjustment, but I don't have that, and I'm not gonna go buy those just yet. So I think I am going to move one of these washers from the back to the front. I'm sorry, from the front to the back. Wait, hold on. Yeah, from the back to the front. And that will essentially move the motor a 1/4 inch forward. And I'm also going to, there are 3 spacers, you can't see them, but 3 spacers here for the height of the motor mount. I'm gonna remove one of those spacers. Those are about 1/4 inch a piece as well. So the motor will drop a 1/4 inch and move forward a 1/4 inch. And I think that'll give me the ability to rotate this motor just a little bit and give me more clearance over on the driver's side. Collector, I may have to notch the hole on the C-beam at the back of the transmission just for that extra 1/4 inch, and of course the drive shaft will probably have a 1/4 inch less engagement, because I believe as it sits, the back flange of this bell housing should be identical spacing wise front to back, if all my measurements are correct, from the original. So right now this is in the right spot. If I move the motor a 1/4 inch forward, this is going to be off by a 1/4 inch, which means I'll have a 1/4 inch less engagement on the drive shaft. I don't think that's going to be a big deal. So that's what I'm going to do next, I think. It's actually pretty late tonight, so I think I'm probably going to tackle that tomorrow. Real quick, for anyone who might be doing this swap in the future and wanting to not use the OEM harness, this is your backup switch. So there's connectivity across these 2 wires. When it's in reverse, so you can wire that directly to your backup lights. And then this is your vehicle speed sensor. And this, I'll have to figure out later how to get the Holley ECU to read this, but that's where I'll pull vehicle speed from. Okay. Okay, I'll be in a minute. Okay, I did what I said I was going to do off camera. I moved the engine about a 1/4 inch forward and about a 1/4 inch down. That definitely cleared up a good deal of clearance over here by this collector. So that's good. It allowed me also to get to these top bolts, which I couldn't access before. So the next thing I need to do is measure the clearance on these, the tains, whatever they're called, on the fork, or on the clutch disc, the pressure plate. Measure the distance from here to here. I've already taken a measurement on the inside, on the transmission side. So I'll have to do some math and figure out if I need spacers on that hydraulic throwout bearing. So this is just a piece of flat scrap I have around. So I'll be able to take a measurement here. And I'll have to remove a couple of looks like we're getting 76.4 millimeters to the top surface of this. So 76.4. This is 6.4 millimeters. So that's 70 millimeters. Let me just verify that again. Yep, 76.4. Less this is 70 millimeters, pretty much on the nose. And then I need the thickness of this guy here. So let's do that. It's like 9.1 millimeters. So 9.1 millimeters thick here and 70 millimeters to those forks. So let me do some math and figure out what kind of spacing I need. Okay, we're gonna run through my math real quick just so you can see it. You just saw me measure 70 millimeters from the pressure plate tains to the Bellhousing face, and then it's 13 millimeters from that face to the center protrusion. I don't know what the proper name for that is, but that is where spacers will ride between the hydraulic throwout bearing and the transmission housing. So that gives us a net of 57 millimeters to work with for the throwout bearing. The throwout bearing itself is 44 millimeters thick, and the instructions say to leave, it's actually in inches, 0.15 to 0.2 inches of a gap. That's about 4 millimeters. It's actually like 3.8 millimeters to 5 millimeters, something like that. So I'm working with a 4 millimeter gap. I find millimeters easier to work with just because the math is easier. So that means I have a net of 9 millimeters that need to be taken up by a spacer. The spacers they supply only give me about 3 millimeters, so I'm gonna make my own spacer to take up the space. So that's what we'll do next. complete. I need to deburr it and clean it up a little bit, but I've got this cut. This is basically the same size, slightly smaller diameter, but roughly the same size as the spacers that came with the kit. They're just not enough of them. And then step 2, using the same pilot hole, I'll cut the inside diameter, which is basically the same inside diameter. It's just a little bit larger, but it'll work for purposes of what we're going for. And just like that, I have a 6.2 millimeter spacer. I don't know if you can see those numbers or not. So we'll add it to these to get roughly 9 millimeters. Let's see, this might be a little bit much. Yeah, 9.5. .6. Let's see here. 8.2. 8.7. We may run all of them. 9.6. It should be pretty close. I'll take a closer look at the measurements just to make sure I'm as close as possible, but it should get us pretty close. Okay, on this kit, you can see my spacers back there. I went with, after redoing the math, I went with 8.7 millimeters. It has you replace one of these bolts that hold on this center housing with this pin here, a guide pin for the hydraulic throwout bearing. These are roughly in line, these hydraulic hoses, with where the hole is in the bell housing, so they'll have to turn a little bit, but the hole should be right around here. And then you need to check to make sure that this pin is not too long. If I had less shims back here, this might have to be trimmed because you don't want this pin hitting the pressure plate as it spins. So we should be good there because it's actually behind this surface. So then the next step is connect this up to the master cylinder and bleed the system down, and then push the clutch in and make sure that this actually throws more than a 1/2 inch. It's made for the C4 Corvette, I believe, so it should work without a problem, but we'll just double check that. If the throw is less than a 1/2 inch according to the instructions, you need to think about getting a different master cylinder that will make this thing throw more. So we'll do that. We'll go ahead and bleed it down and make sure we're good there. And then once it's bled, really, it should be time to start putting this thing together. Okay, we are about ready to mate these things together. It's hard to see them, it's a little too close, but transmission is down here. Just using the floor jack. I'm gonna have my wife man the jack while I manhandle it up in place. Of note, there is no stop on that hydraulic throwout bearing, so I tried bleeding it with my wife pressing the clutch, and it just pops out because there's no limiter. So you'll definitely need to, if you're doing this, pay attention to the gap, because if you have too much gap, you may overthrow that bearing and it's going to pop out and not work correctly. So gap is definitely important. So since it popped out, I did measure it and make sure it had the proper throw of over a 1/2 inch. But once it's in here and there's it's being limited so it doesn't come apart, I'll take to bleeding this properly, because
can't really do it with it out of the car. So this should be interesting and fun, getting the input shaft and the guide pin to line up on this hydraulic throwout bearing while I put the transmission in. So let's get to it. Transmission is in. Getting so excited. Next, we will probably throw the C-beam in. And I think, well, drive shaft and then C-beam, I think that's the order it needs to go in. And then we really should be able to let the transmission be supported on its own weight. The C-beam should get the back of it, and then the motor obviously has the front of it. I did break a little bit of a rule, not too bad. You're never supposed to draw a transmission into the engine using the bolts. Because of the tolerances, the really tight tolerances that you saw earlier on the Bellhousing, and that the inner front of the transmission, it kind of needs to be drawn in a little bit with the bolts. Didn't take much pressure at all. So I got it all the way in without using the bolts, but really it just wasn't going to go that last little bit without using the bolts. Really didn't, it probably took like 10 foot-pounds of turning pressure on the bolts, if that. It wasn't much at all to get them to pull together, but I did pull them together with the bolts. But I feel pretty confident everything was going together smoothly. So we will get this drive shaft in and the C-beam, and we should be able to pull this jack out of here. The motor is probably in total about a ½ inch further forward, or at least the back of the transmission is. It may be a combination of the motor mount change and the Bellhousing being slightly shorter. So I needed to elongate out these holes on the C-beam. I did so on both ends. So we should have enough clearance at this point. It might have been a little bit too much, but I don't want to keep taking this in and out, so I just elongated them enough so that there's enough material here. So we'll get to throwing this in the car, and we should be able to bolt it up, hopefully, if I pulled the right amount of material out. Drive shaft is in, C-beam is in, everything's bolted together. and being supported by its own weight. I still need to tighten down the motor mounts, but they're in there. And obviously, next on the list is put the starter in. The transmission needs to be topped off because it spilled some fluid when I pulled it out, so I need to put a little more transmission fluid in it. Need to wire up the vehicle speed sensor and reverse. I need to do some research. I don't know if that's a reverse lockout solenoid. I think this transmission is supposed to just have a crash gate, so I don't actually know what this connector's for, because I think this is vehicle speed sensor, so I need to do a little research and just make sure. I also need to get some exhaust tubing ordered. I took a couple of measurements. I think I'm going to be able to fit 3-inch all the way down, except right there in the back below the rear diff. If I use 3-inch there, it's going to be the low point of the whole car, but it's wide enough. I think I can just smash it down and kind of ovalize, maybe about 10 inches of the 3-inch, so that it's only about 2 inches high, 1.5 inches, 2 inches high. By then, I think exhaust gases will have cooled off a little bit, so the diameter is not as important from my understanding in the rear of the car as it is in the front, because as it flows through, it starts cooling off, and cooler gases are more dense. They require less space, so if you want the performance of the 3-inch, but you need to drop to like 2.5 at the back, or in this case, ovalize the 3, it shouldn't affect it as much. So that's kind of my plan, I think. There is a constriction up here. The collectors themselves are only 2.5 inch. Let's see, I can get some light up there. Yeah, there. This is only 2.5 inch for a very short while, so I'm gonna have to go from 2.5 up to 3, and then 3 all the way back. So that'll be a little bit of a restriction, but again, not a big deal. And I need to bleed the clutch system, and we're getting really close. So I'll probably do the rest of that off camera, since it's probably boring to watch me wire and fill a transmission. Okay, I need to correct something that I said earlier in this video and just update you. So that is the reverse switch. I have that wired in. I kind of made a wire loom and found the connectors. However, I said that this was vehicle speed sensor. I'm incorrect after a little research. That is your skip shift, or CAGs, that will shift it from first to fourth under certain conditions. I'm not using that. I've actually tuned it out of the stock Corvette ECU when I was running that, and it won't be wired in this time either. And the VSS, or vehicle speed sensor, is the one all the way back by the tail shaft. So that one's wired up. I'm still doing some research on exactly what kind of signal that puts out. I don't know right now. If someone does know and they want to throw it in the comments, I don't know if that's a 5-volt or 12-volt system, and what kind of signal to expect on the other end, so I can set up the Holly. But I went ahead and ran wires up through the firewall, and it's not wired into the Holly yet, but the wires are up there, so I can do that. And with the reverse sensor wired up, I now have reverse lights, so that should be the last of the wiring almost. If I pull it out, pop it out of reverse, normal reverse lights. All right, that's gonna about wrap it up for this video. Transmission is in. Next up is probably an exhaust. I am waiting for that ECU to come in from Holly still. I think it might actually arrive tomorrow, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and hit the exhaust first. Part of the Holly is using the wideband sensor, and I don't have an O2 bung directly in the header, nor should you. You should have it after the collector. So I probably need to at least build out part of the exhaust before I go ahead and do the first start, or run it for any length of time. I suppose I could throw the ECU on and start it for a few seconds, but so I think I'm probably going to hit the exhaust next and then work on a first start. But that'll do it for this video. So thanks for watching, guys.